Good morning. Welcome to Member Focus Monday. I'm Christina Schaefer, the social media manager for HAR, and I'm joined this morning by Ward Arndt. Ward, thank you for being here. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name's Ward Arndt, as Christina said, and I'm a member of the Houston Association of Realtors, of course, but also more importantly, my wife, Marilyn, has a company that I also am a member of, Marilyn Art Properties. And to give you an idea of what my background is that I became a realtor in 1996 and have been involved very much with the governmental affairs, but also other things. I was chair of MLS and technology and international and a bunch of other things, both for the Houston Association of Realtors and the Texas Association of Realtors. As far as the city is concerned, I'm currently the chairman of the City of Houston Building and Standards Commission. But I've been totally involved with the governmental affairs advisory group for many years, as well as the political affairs advisory group, and have been the co-chair of the governmental affairs, I think 2 or 3 times. But currently I'm specializing mostly in the state and federal side of it, although I'm very much aware of what's going on locally in the city.
All right, thank you. And thank you again so much for being here. So as advertised, we're going to be talking about ReBuild Houston this morning. It was labeled, what is ReBuild Houston, or ReBuild Houston Explained. So we're going to get to that. But ReBuild Houston, as a lot of people know, we're voting on this again. Can you explain to us why we're kind of having a do-over vote?
Yes. Well, we have to have a little bit of a history lesson on this, this particular topic. One of the interesting things is that in 2010, November 2010, we had Proposition 1, which was a charter amendment that put together the ReBuild Houston charter. And it was put into force in July of 2011. And that was after the city went through a lot of process to develop what's known as the Chapter 47 Code of Ordinances. And this is where the things get a little bit complicated, but not too much at this point. What happened was that there was a Supreme Court decision that in 2015 that invalidated the ballot language of Proposition 1, and it threw things into a little bit of disarray. However, the ordinance was in effect because this was something that was voted on by City Council, and so it's outside of the charter. And so it's really important to understand that although the amendment has been nullified, everything's in place as it was, with the exception of one thing, and that was what's called the lockbox, or the restrictions on how you spend funds. And so what we're looking at today is trying to figure out what we should do with that. Do we want to put a lockbox or restrict the use of funds, or do something else?
Right. Okay. Well, that makes sense. So what are the funding sources available to Houston to improve infrastructure and drainage?
Yes. Well, some of the reasons behind the ReBuild Houston, of course, was that it was supposed to be a pay-as-you-go type program. Okay. And it was sort of thought of as a neat way to escape the idea of going into bonded indebtedness. And so what we wanted to do is start to pay as you go rather than issue improvement bonds, or the city issue improvement bonds. Mm-hmm. And so basically the source of funds were going to be as follows. 1, developer impact fees, drainage charges, which you all pay in your water bill, mm-hmm. which are, impact us greatly. Yes. And then there's a portion of the city's ad valorem taxes that are a part of this whole ReBuild Houston. And then there are third-party contracts, grants, payments earmarked or dedicated to drainage or streets. And those are the 4 key sources of funding.
Okay, very good. So again, we're voting on Prop A in November. Harris County, residents are. So what happens if Proposition A fails?
Okay, if in the city of Houston, where this really impacts us the most, if it fails, you can say there are two things that are going to happen. One, really nothing is going to happen in terms of you still are going to have to pay your drainage fee.
Yeah.
Now, the question is really, do you want those fees to have a lockbox on it? In other words, they're specifically used for streets and drainage. Or do you want them to basically be open to all sorts of other charges, which may or may not have anything to do with drainage or streets? And that's the key issue. And I know that there's been a lot of talk back and forth on whether or not the city has been fiduciarily responsible for what they've done to date. That's sort of outside of the scope of this discussion. But those are the two issues that we want to see. If it fails, no lockbox. If it passes, there will be a lockbox with some restrictions.
Okay. Well, very good. I think we may have had a couple questions pop up from our members, so let's see what happened there. And if you have any questions for Ward, questions about ReBuild Houston, Prop A, please go ahead and type them in, and we'll take a look at those. All right. Thought I saw at least one question pop up here. So Cyril's actually asking, what is your political affiliation? I think we could say it at the same time, the Realtor Party.
The
right?
Realtor Party, absolutely. You know, the funny thing is, I'm glad you asked that, because, you know, we strongly support oftentimes people that are friendly to private property rights. And this includes the Democrats and the Republicans. And, you know, every year, the Houston Association of Realtors, along with all the associations in the country, meet in Washington, D.C. to meet with their congressmen and their senators. And one of the most enjoyable things is the Houston Association of Realtors hosts a breakfast on 2 days with all of the Houston delegation. And the Republicans and Democrats all want to be there because they all are very supportive of Houston.
Yes.
And it's really neat because you see, for one instant, outside of all the political rhetoric out there, that the R's and D's are breaking bread together and they really like each other. And it's sort of stupid, but we really appreciate that. And when we have a problem, we can go to, you know, both the Republicans and Democrats, and they are on the same page on our issues. It's great.
Absolutely. The Realtor Party has a very strong voice in Austin. Absolutely.
And in D.C.
In D.C., absolutely,
basically,
as well. Okay. So I don't see any other questions. Do you have any other comments you want to make about ReBuild Houston?
Well, you know, it's one of those things that I think that we ought to seriously consider. And I really recommend that you listen to what the city has to say. And also, you know, there's some pundits out there like Bill King who make some pretty strong arguments one way or the other. But I think it's really incumbent upon you as voters and citizens and realtors to really get involved, try to understand what the background of this whole thing is, and then try to make a logical decision. But I think that in my case, I would probably be voting for Prop 1 because it really gives us maybe a small window of locking down some of these funds. Nothing is perfect, and things do change behind closed doors. But basically, I think we've got a good chance of doing something that's good. Absolutely.
So Maria's asking, how have the funds been used so far to improve drainage?
Well, it's basically they're doing some work on public sewers and mostly the storm sewers, and you can see that in many of the districts around Houston. And you know, for instance, I live over on the west side in District G, and some of those areas over there have had some serious flooding, and so they're trying to accommodate some of those floodwaters and try to rebuild those things. For instance, Memorial Drive is being completely redone. They're putting some huge box culverts underneath the street, and that's part of the rebuild process. I think it's a great idea.
Absolutely. So let's see here. So a couple comments from Lois. just basically saying, Bill King is you mentioned Bill King. It's actually a very long comment, so I'll probably take it down. But he's opposed to Rebuild Houston,
certainly.
as you mentioned. Yeah. Okay. So that looks like it for our questions. We don't have any other questions. Do you have any other?
No, I think that's really it. So I'd say,
I think it's it didn't take us long to explain it, but it's something that needed explaining. So I think this has probably been really helpful. So thank you so much.
I really appreciate you and HAR inviting me down here today and to talk about this important issue.
Absolutely.
And remember, get out there and vote early and vote often.
Yes.
Thank you.
No matter how you're voting, vote early and vote often. That's right. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us for another Member Focus Monday. We'll be back next Monday. We're actually going to have the guests from Remind back. So if anybody is wanting to join in for another Remind discussion and an overview and things like that, we'll be talking about that next week. Actually, I do see one more question that popped up there. Oh, a couple more questions. Do you think Rebuild Houston is a good idea?
Yes. in a word, I think it's really important.
Yeah.
It's just one of those things that, the infrastructure in Houston, as in most large cities, is it just needs a big refresh. And it's a very expensive proposition. And over, a 30-year period, which this is really looking at, it's going to take a lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of effort. And nothing is going to be perfect, but at least we're going to go in the right direction.
Absolutely. Marilyn is actually asking.
Yes, that's my wife.
Yes. Will there be a cap on our fee?
Probably not. It's one of those things that can be adjusted because these are ordinances that are put together by the city, and so like anything else, these things have there's some creep to them,
right?
And so we may see the fees increase over time.
Sure. Lois actually had a question about allocating funds. Why they maybe prioritize some neighborhoods over others. For example, Memorial Drive getting fixed.
Yes, prioritizing funds is up to your city council, and they go through these capital improvement fund type situations, and they most of the city council, well, all of the city council members and districts have these meetings. They explain what they want to do in your district, and so it's incumbent upon you to pressure not only your district member but the at-large members to try to get some momentum to help your district. And this is how things get done. Now, each district member does get a certain amount of allocation that they can do anything with their money. And sometimes they put it into roads, and sometimes they put it into drainage, and sometimes they put it into parks. Who knows? But it's really important that you have a voice with your particular city council member.
Absolutely. So this is a kind of interesting question. How does someone who has rental property in Houston but live outside of Houston vote?
You don't. I'm sorry. You can't.
You can definitely let your voice be heard, though. I think
you certainly
with social media and everything that you have available, let your voice be heard and
talk to the people that are renting your house.
Absolutely. Yeah. Can you explain the lockbox in more detail? Oops.
Well, like everything else, the lockbox is pretty well described, I believe, in the ballot language. Go into Houston Votes, and you can take a look at the actual ballot language, and they talk a great deal about what can be funded through the Rebuild Houston process, and there are some really specific things that you can and cannot do. Some of the things are things like what salaries can be used against that. What if money can or cannot be used to pay down debt? That's one of the things would be a part of the lockbox. You cannot use this money to pay down debt. But there's several other things that are important, but you should take a look at that and sort of see where you're going with it.
So someone asked for us to revisit the comments about why Bill King is opposed to Rebuild Houston.
Oh, well.
Basically, it says that 800 million in Rebuild Houston was not used for drainage. It was used to pay city employees. So do you have any comments or any thoughts on that?
This would be a part of the Lockbox situation. And Bill King is looking at this from a different point of view. Christine and I were talking about this earlier, and Bill King comes from a commercial accounting background. Very good at it, excellent. He can explain that very well. Municipal accounting and commercial accounting are a little bit different. Mm-hmm. And so what he says is absolutely true from his point of view, and he can explain it very well. From a municipal accounting point of view, you'd have to talk to Chris Brown, who's the comptroller, and it's a very arcane way of putting things together, and sometimes they don't make any sense at all. But the mayor says that basically they have paid down about $1 billion, and Bill King can refute that very nicely. But at the same time, there's a lot of discussion back and forth. And that's why I think you need to be involved in this and try to figure out what these people are really saying.
Absolutely. Let your voice be heard. All right. Well, that is it for our questions. Again, thank you so much, Ward, for joining us.
It's my pleasure.
This has been really informative and great. So I do appreciate you joining us.
Well, Christine, it's a real pleasure for me to be here today.
Thank you. And again, next Monday, we will have Remind back with us. So if you are curious about the Remind program that all HER members have access to, join us next Monday, 9 a.m. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.